Okay, advanced ceramics students, we're going to move into our next unit called Thrown and Altered. And to talk about throw and alter, we're going to divide it into different categories. These categories are basically techniques that all fall under the umbrella technique of throw and alter. We're going to talk about how to be subtractive, additive, folding, joining, flattening, and a combination technique. So starting with subtractive, what we have here is basically objects and vessels that were thrown on the wheel, and then in the leather hard state, they were cut into and parts of the pieces are removed. So that is the subtractive method of throw and alter. If you look closely here, throw and alter could be just kind of changing the edge of the form that you throw on the wheel, at the leather hard state, and after trimming, you can come back in here and cut away the edge, or you can bring your cuts down into the body of your object that you throw on the wheel, or you can take more of a carving with these two, a carving approach, but actually, piercing and removing parts of the thrown object so that it becomes kind of see-through. Same here, these parts up here are parts that were cut into and removed for that negative space, or even just not so much carving, but piercing through the form after it's thrown in leather hard. So if you're seeing a trend here, the trend is that the object starts off as a thrown object, and then once it is, in the leather hard state, you're going to manipulate it further, or we have some techniques that show you how to take a thrown object, and while it's still on the wheel and in the wet clay stage, how we alter it even further. Please make note that I have links down here that you can click onto from the Google Slides that I attached to the classroom assignment. And these are, directly related to the slide at hand. So these are two really great links that show you subtractive throw and alter techniques. The next one would be the opposite, which is additive. And additive is simply that you throw the foundation of your object on the wheel, and then in the leather hard state, you're going to add onto it or build onto it, okay? So for example, here, this large pitcher that I have, these vases or vessels with these really, really long, tall, skinny necks are quite difficult to just throw on the wheel. But if you can throw this form on the wheel and maybe get the neck to about right here, then once it's off the wheel and leather hard and trimmed, then think about how easy it is just to finish it off with coiling. And then that, adding that hand building to it allows you to elongate that neck so much taller and more elaborate and exaggerated than you could do just on the wheel. You can change the entire form tremendously with the additive. So I want you to kind of look in the center, and in the center of this cup form, you can see the part that was thrown. It's very easy to see that nice kind of thrown cup form. But what you see on the left-hand side and you see on the right-hand side, that was all added on, probably using, slabs that they constructed, these kind of, geometric forms, and then they scored them and attached them onto the thrown form. And it really changed the whole overall shape of this thrown cup. This is another example of additive, but taking a thrown form and then adding, scoring, pieces of clay on top of it, even if it's just for, decorative purposes, you are still taking something that you threw on the wheel and then changing it and continuing to alter it once it's been off the wheel. Same with this, it's very similar, that this form was thrown on the wheel, and if you look at it, not only was it thrown on the wheel, but then they flipped it upside down. So basically you have a bowl form, and when it was trimmed and leather hard, they flipped it upside down, and then they, did some subtractive stuff here by removing this side, and then a bunch of additive stuff on the top of this upside down bowl. Again, please make note of the link that shows you some really great example of additive as a throw and alter. Okay, folding is a little bit different because folding is something that happens on the wheel during wet clay stage. And folding is kind of like a spectrum where, folding can be just kind of subtle and a little bit of a altering, or you can be very, very dramatic with the folding. And so here are some examples. Over here up at the top, we have thrown forms. This one is a cup form, and then while wet and on the wheel, probably using fingers, thumbs, a sponge, just kind of pressed. This is kind of called dimpling. Just kind of pressed a finger, thumb, or sponge into the walls to make those impressions. This one right here is a bowl that then, while wet on the wheel, was kind of flattened a little bit to become an oval shape instead of cylindrical, and probably then use some sort of sponge or tool to kind of dimple right in the center there. This one is pretty much the same way, except these marks were made with fingers and using pressure from the inside and the outside of the vessel. So you have a finger on the inside that's pushing out, okay, that's how you get that bump. And then you have a finger on the outside pushing in, and that's how you get that bump, okay? So really just while it's very wet and on the wheel, you're just kind of pressing and sliding your fingers around to make these like waves. This is just very, very subtle folding, taking that rim and pinching the rim in a few places so that you get a different shape and not just your regular rounded shape, but it still constitutes as throwing and then altering and falls under the folding category. Here's another example of dimpling, applying exterior pressure into the wet form while still on the wheel. And then these are a little more dramatic. This shows you kind of throwing a very open bowl form, or even close to like a plate form, and then while wet, taking one side of it and just bringing it all the way over to the other side. Same here, bringing both sides. It started as, if you can imagine, almost like an open plate, and then bringing both sides of the wall inward and curving it towards the center, which now created this closed form. Okay, joining has so many options, and a lot of students really like working with this technique. Joining can happen in many ways. Joining is about throwing multiple forms on the wheel, and then while they are leather hard, you are going to attach them together. Okay, that's what joining is. And so I have some examples of kind of joining can happen in the vertical, but a lot of people forget that joining can happen in the horizontal, okay? So here we have two bowls that were thrown, and then in leather hard state, they were joined together, and then a handle was added. And here's the same concept, but kind of a top view. So you can see that they were soft enough, early leather hard enough for these walls when they were kind of pressed together, that they were able to, form together and take shape. Um, and so, it's almost like you have two kind of half circles that came together. Here is throwing three bowls, and when they are leather hard, then maybe slicing, one side of the bowl off, adding these slabs that go in between the three bowls. And then you get this, this three bowled serving set that is technically becomes one piece now, and then the same down here. But again, look at the multiple steps. I mean, we have three bowls that we know were probably joined together in early leather hard, but you see folding as well. So you know that folding had to happen during wet clay stage on the wheel. And then when these three bowls became early leather hard, they were maybe pressed together. Areas of the bowls were maybe cut away so that the three of them could be joined together to really make one cohesive whole. I think it's easy for us to understand vertical joining, when we want to build something tall, that sometimes it's difficult to just throw all of that on the wheel in one piece. So we work with multiple pieces, throwing the body of the vase as one piece, and then throwing the neck and the mouth of the vase as a second piece. And then when they're leather hard, they get joined together. Same here, throwing the body first, throwing the neck and mouth second, and then getting them joined. Here's more vertical joining examples, and really these are just to show you kind of for that height. Joining doesn't always have to be like obvious. It doesn't always have to be, oh, okay, here's the body and here's the neck. It could just be a really tall, cylinder that you're just not able to get it to the height you want. So just even as cylinder forms, they can be multiple parts that come together. Flattening, I have a link here for you to be able to watch some demos on flattening, but flattening is about, manipulating it while it's still wet clay on the wheel. After you throw a cylinder, you can kind of bring the walls together to turn it into an oval form. And there's a variety of degrees. It's something that can wind up like this picture down here that is extremely kind of flattened and narrow, or it could be like this where it's still kind of rounded and pillowy and puffy. But flattening doesn't always have to happen, from side to side with the walls. Flattening can also happen from top to bottom. So these are kind of, cylinder shapes that are cut off the wheel, and then while they're, kind of, wet clay to early leather hard, just using gravity and dropping them and allowing gravity to kind of create that shape. And then think about, well, what would happen if I did, multiple and joined them all together? So this is an example of flattening. And then, of course, there is a combination, which I think is what happens most with throwing and altering. You're going to have multiple techniques within the same piece. So this is an example of, folding, right, on the white edge here, but then also joining together this bowl form and this base form. Here we have lots of pieces that have been flattened and then joined together. So we have like these cylinders at the bottom, and then up here we have some thrown cylinders that have been, flattened or cut up, and we know they're thrown because we can see they're throwing marks, okay? And then they've been joined together. The cylinder's been kind of cut on the sides, and then this has been lowered into those cuts. So I'm just sharing with you a few artists that are known for their throw-in altars. This is Tom Brewer. He works with, very vertical pieces. Most of his are sculptural, but of course he also does, quite a bit of utilitarian as well. But it's kind of obvious to see how things are joined together. So he definitely works with joining, making different parts that stem from the wheel. They come from the wheel, and then when they're leather hard and trimmed, they get manipulated and altered and joined together with other pieces. So now that we kind of know some of these techniques and we have terminologies for them, it's a really good practice to be able to look at professional artwork and try to deconstruct, look at it and say, okay, how did this person make that? What were the steps? And it's a really good practice. So when we look at this piece, my example here is that, all right, I can see that we have a cylinder here in the middle that was thrown on the wheel. And then I can see that the side pieces here was probably a wide, short cylinder thrown on the wheel and then flattened, because it's become oval. And then once it was leather hard, that flattened piece was cut in half, and they took one side of that flattened piece and they scored it onto the center cylinder, and they took the other side and scored it onto the other part of the cylinder. And so that's how they created this piece. So even with the most simple forms, I want you to think about how this could have been constructed, and there may be more than one answer. When we look at this, it looks very simple, but when we really deconstruct and think about how it was made, there are a couple of options. I mean, first of all, this could be simply like a folded piece. Maybe the whole thing was thrown on the wheel as one big round cylinder, and then while it was still, wet on the wheel, they used a tool and was able to press in, one side and press in the other side to almost kind of get this, double cylinder shape. That's possible. Or another way that's possible is they threw two separate cylinders, allowed them to get leather hard. When they were leather hard, they kind of cut off one side of each cylinder and then joined them. So, there could be more than one answer, and we don't really know. That's what is so great about being a strong ceramic artist, is when people look at your work and they're not 100% sure how you accomplished it. That means that you are being inventive and innovative with your techniques, and that's a really good thing to kind of have as a reputation as an artist. So I challenge you to look at this one and deconstruct it. How did this form come to be? Knowing that this is throw-in altar, so it had to originate on the wheel. So what part originated on the wheel, or what parts, and then when did they start changing the shape and how? So please, do your best, try to deconstruct that. Here is just some past student work that are very old and outdated, but they're really great examples of what we just talked about. I have 3 examples here of joining, but I think that they're really extremely different examples. You can tell that the black and white one and the one over here on the left, they were joining so that they could finally get the height that they wanted, that verticality. Here they were very eclectic with all their pieces. I think they threw like 4 different pieces and then join them together, where this student was being very mindful about her form, very meticulous and mindful. But I think she wound up having 3 pieces that joined together to create this one. But here, this is also joining. This is an example of 3 bowls, because these kinds of bumps and curves were very difficult for a beginning thrower to be able to get on the wheel with one lump of clay. But they knew that they were able to throw 3 small bowls, and then they were joined together. And then here was a great example of flattening, and not just flattening, but then they did some subtractive. They did some carving and some piercing all the way through it. So a lot of strong examples about what we just talked about. So for your assignment, the foundation of the object that you make has to be wheel thrown. So the foundation has to come from the wheel. You need to start at the wheel, but you don't need to end at the wheel. You can manipulate whatever you throw on the wheel as much as you want. It is required that it has to be altered, that it can't just be thrown on the wheel, taken off the wheel, and called done. You have to alter it either in its wet clay stage or in the leather hard stage. You may go whatever route you want. You can go completely sculptural or functional. If you want to explore throwing and altering, but still keep it, very functional and very utilitarian, you can. If you want to go more decorative, like trying to make functional wear that maybe isn't the best for use, but it looks great, like on a shelf or on a mantle, if it's more decorative, that's fine. Or you can go totally sculptural. I mean, think back to abstract sculpture. You can definitely explore that again. Your size requirements for your art piece is a minimum of 8 inches either way. So remember, if you're building something more vertical, then it has to be bigger than 8 inches. If you're building something that's slightly more horizontal, it has to be wider than 8 inches. And because of time and being able to move through our units this year, I'm thinking that a maximum of 14 inches. I think that gives you enough space to be really creative, but also doesn't, make this a project that's going to last forever. The goal of this unit is to create an object that's, thrown and altered, but then to also use your test tiles to decide on the finish for it. So that's something that over the years I've learned. I highly encourage that. If you feel that your art piece really calls for a different finish, something that you don't have from your test tiles, then of course I'm very, very flexible about that. But I do want to push you to make those test tiles that you learned how to do, to make them useful. And now, look at your test tiles and see if there's one in there that would be a really great finish for your throw and alter piece. Of course, when you do your sketches, you're going to have to consider a color, and then that decision can always be changed. But to get all of your points, it has to be in color. You have to have lots of construction plans and notes for me. I need to know all of the steps. How many pieces are you going to throw? How are you going to alter it? What's the technique? What stage of clay are you going to do it in? Okay. Is there going to be additional things like carvings and underglaze designs? All of that information has to be annotated for me. And then you must have inspiration images as well to get all of your points. So I hope you're excited about this unit. It's one of my favorites. It's how I work. This is my style and my technique for creating my own sculptural objects and my utilitarian work. So I really enjoy seeing what my students think of it and what you can come up with.